So we are now continuing with our barcode program. If you have not watched the first one, you need to go back and watch that one, unless you can type very fast and just want to copy this. But I highly recommend watching the first one. It's 30 minutes. I'm going to try my best to keep these videos 30 minutes or less. Anyway, so we have created a new function called openFile. Guess what it does? And it now returns data to the student data here. However, this data, we need to look and see what it is, because while this is okay, it's not perfect for our needs. So we're going to print the type of student data. Okay, and the type meaning the type of variable. So Python has several different variable types. You have Boolean, which is true or false. You also have list, which is a grouping of things that is unordered. You have sets. You have dictionaries. I'm not going to overwhelm you with a bunch of stuff. We will cover them all as we get to them. So this is simply going to tell us the type. So if we, again, run this with Python main.py, if we could type, that's helpful. You'll see here that it is a string. Okay, we do not want it as a string because of reasons. So what we're going to do is we're going to need to modify this open file here to return something different. Now there's two ways we could do this, because what I want is I want a list of strings. I want each row to be its own entry. And to do that, we have a couple ways of doing it. We could just simply split this string on a new line. So we could say .split and then say /n, and that would give us what we need, which is a list. And you see here that everything is done that way. But you'll notice that there are some weird things in here. So because of that, actually, I think that's actually in the data, if I'm not mistaken. Nope, it's not. It's that little thing there. Anyway, so that's one. This is an escape character, by the way. So that is the one variable, the one way to do it. Another way to do it is we could say, instead of read, we could say read lines, okay? And we could make this a list up here, all right? And we could say file data dot append f read lines. And so then at that point, we essentially would get the same thing, okay? Which is going to give us, like I said, essentially the same thing. Of course, this is a list within a list, which is a problem. I'm sorry, that's not correct. Equals read lines. Yes, there. If we were to do read line, we could add them individually. But in this case, read lines is going to grab all of them and return into a file data, which is a list here. And you'll see that, again, we have that list. That class is a list. And we have a single list here. This is one entry. And you'll notice that we have the new line here, but here we don't have a new line, which is how the file is. So potato, potato, tomato, tomato, however you feel like doing it. This, I think most people would say, is most correct. And also, you're not having to worry about manually grabbing those lines, because in a Windows world, they might be a /r instead of a /n. So for compatibility reasons, it's probably a good idea for you to use read lines. All right, and this wasn't really a short-sightedness. I was trying to just do quick and easy on the first, and we go back and we'll refactor. Programming, you're going to find over time, you a lot of times will hack something together to make it work, and then you go back and refine it more and more and more to make it more pleasant. There's still more we can do to this file, this function, believe it or not, and we're going to do that now. We're going to introduce a new concept called try and catch. These are exceptions and how to do error handling and checking. So we assume, now this file is here, right? We know that it is a file, okay? But what if we don't have permission to read it? The file might exist, but we don't have permission to read it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say try, and we're going to move all this in one indentation. Again, Python is all about the indentions. So we're going to try to do this. And if we fail, okay, we have an exception. And this exception we're just going to pass for now, okay? And you could say like permission error or one of these other things. Permission error is probably the number one thing that you would run into. And the more correct way is to say, you know, except on permission issue pass, and then if you have others, you would add additional exceptions. But I'm all about the quick and lazy. So exception, you can just say exception as E, okay, and E is now an object of the exception. So you could say, you know, print the exception if you wanted. And so we're going to do that. We're going to print and say unable to open. We're going to use some special stuff here. We're going to say curly bracket open and close, okay, unable to open file, okay, and then we're going to say due to error. Now we're going to use some new things from Python 3 point whatever. I think that this was changed in like 3.1 or something, but basically old school Python you did string replacement, but with new school Python it's much better for you to use the format. So .format, and now what we can do is we can replace these placeholders we've created here with variables. And Python will handle the formatting for you. So you don't have to worry about a string inheriting some type of bad variable and it can't handle it. So in this case, it does some error checking for you on the fly. So you can say file, right? File equals, in this case, the file name, right? And then error equals E. Not 3, but E. So now what this does is it basically says, if we have any exception, doesn't matter what it is, change that to a variable E. Well, not really change it, just store it as E. And then we're going to print to the screen, unable to open file, the file name, due to error, and then E, right? So file equals this. Now, you technically don't need to name these. You could use numbers. So you could say 0, right? And that would work. Or 1, right? But I like to use naming on them if possible, due to the fact that, especially if you have multiples that you're passing, this way if someone were to go behind you, they can kind of see what goes where without counting the spaces and the number of placeholders. It just makes your code even more readable, which is the name of the game. So file data here, it's going to say there's a typo in the name because it doesn't like that name. They probably want camel case or something. I don't do camel case. It's just a thing. I come from PHP days. We never did camel case. I'm sure some people did because they came from Java or whatever. But anyway, nothing wrong with it. But anyway, so now open file. We're now done with it. Okay. This open file here, we have the file data is set automatically to an empty list. We're going to, if the file name exists, we're going to try to open it for reading. And we're going to read that data. If we have any exception, we're going to pass the exception, just ignore it after we print out to the screen, and we're going to return file data. Now, in the chain of logic here, file data was the very first thing that we've defined. Down here, we're simply redefining it, reassigning its value. So file data always has a value, so when we return down here, we won't have an error. Because if you try to return a variable that doesn't exist, well, things break. So that is how to do that. Now, normally, as you become more of a programmer, you might start building yourself your own modules and start having things like this in those modules so that you can import them into every project and not have to worry about recreating them from scratch each time. That's something that a lot of seasoned programmers do. Anyway, so now we have the file data, right? And we know that it is a list, which is great. And now, so for each row and entry in that file, we got to grab some data. Well, we can do that very easily. Python already has a ability to loop very easily. Actually, easier than PHP, which is saying something. But we're going to do this first. And again, our pseudocode is just there as a generalized guideline. We can move things around and change how we want. I like to use a lot of functions because if you have things in the function, you don't have to worry so much about losing your place in your code, or you have freedom of mobility, I guess is the best way to say it. You can move this function anywhere you want as long as when you call the function down here, it has to have been defined somewhere up in the file. So you can't put this down here. And the reasoning for that is Python is an interpreter. So it will actually read this file top to down, left to right, same as most English speaking and European speaking. And it will read it just the same way you and I do. And it will process it into machine code. It will actually process it into Python compiled format, which then turns into machine code, which then goes to the processor. And that is how programmers do. So, anywho, so we're going to now download this data from each of them. So we're going to need to create a function for that. Now, we can't just say, hey, download, right? We have to import a module. And the module that we're going to import, there are some that are built into Python, but there's one that I really like to use the most because it just does a lot of things for you very easily. And honestly, I really wish that it would just be included in Python. Just go ahead and, I mean, it's already open source. Just go ahead and put it in there, right? But anywho, so what we're going to do now is we're going to use the pip install. Now, in this case, you see we are still in a virtual environment down here, okay? And we're going to say pip install requests. Notice there is an S on that because there is a request, but that is not the same as requests with an S. And I would sound like a Slytherin. So, you know, URL librarian request and all this stuff comes in. So all of these things are packages that are dependent or dependencies of the request object. So now we can import requests. And you'll notice that it looks different, okay? And that lets you know that it's not part of Python itself. So now we have the request object. Now what does the request object do? What does it do? It's basically like wget or curl. It will go out, grab data from the internet, and come back. It makes things very easy to work with. It's great for posting data, for getting data. It's an all-around great and wonderful HTTP processor. And I will, let's see. I don't think you're going to see this. Nope, you won't, because I've got it locked to my window. But you can go here to request.readthedocs.io. Go there and read about what the request object does. It does some amazing things. It's very easy to work with. It can do headers. It can do encoding. It does great things. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking about it. I'm a bit of a fanboy. So what we're going to do now is we're going to now create a defined get barcode, right? And we need the data that we're going to look for, okay? Because the barcode basically going to reach out to the internet and grab an image from the internet. There are a lot of APIs out there that people can hit to get data for you. So I need to get a barcode, so that's what we're going to be doing here. So yeah, that's relatively easy. So R is going to be an object. This is just a generalized return. I'm picking R just so that it's part of request. It's kind of what they suggest as well. So request.get, and then we simply ask for the URL. In this case, we're just going to do a placeholder of, actually we're not going to do a placeholder, I'm sorry. Up here we're going to do a URL equals empty. And the URL here, we're going to do that, okay? So the URL in this case is an empty string temporarily because I have messed up and I have forgotten that barcode URL. So we're going to go to another workspace, and I hope you can't see all of that. You might, that's okay, whatever. But we're going to now grab this barcode URL. I'm going to put this in the comments because that's just too much for you guys to type. This data here, right, This is important. We'll move that out. Okay, so the URL we're going to now change to base URL. Okay, and that's because this is the base URL. Okay, this has got all the things that are needed for the DPI. The image type is a GIF. Rotation is none. Right? We don't need to rotate anything. Translate. You're gonna, all these things are simple ways that the ASP page, ASS8, that's a new one. WebAssembly, I think. I don't know. It's been a while. I'll have to Google that. Anyway, so this particular API lets you hit that. And so that's great, but we also need to say URL equals our data, right? And in this case, this is going to get confusing. It will. So we're going to change this from data to a string, which will be a string. Let's go ahead and put it at a helper again. String here, okay, format, and then string equals, let's change this string. That's a terrible idea. You really should never name a variable a type. So let's say district ID, which is actually what it is. It's the district ID for the student that we're downloading. Because if you remember in our student data here, Snodgrass Troutman here, her district ID is this. So we're going to be passing this into our URL. And now we're going to say the full URL equals the base URL plus populated URL. And then here we can say the full URL. So the reason I broke it up like this is strictly for readability. I could have kept that data right here in the front, and wait a second, I got to put an add here, an and for sand, so that way it will, be parsed correctly. So there's our data, our string there, okay, and our format. String is actually equal to our district ID. We could actually make this say ID. Let's go ahead and do that actually. There, much better. See, it all looks better now. People were probably having a heart attack who were seasoned programmers, like, dude, fix it, you're killing me. Anyway, so now we have this object of R. Now, that's where request is awesome, because request will come back and give you lots of data about what you've pulled. Okay, this is just a simple GET request, but there's one thing we do need to do to this request object for some error checking, because while we love the internet, it's not always reliable. And while people run APIs, they're also not always reliable. There are load balancer issues. There are machine crashes. Things just happen. There's DDoSes and whatnot. So we're going to do a timeout equals 5 or 4. That's a 3. So here, with the timeout of equaling 5, we're basically saying that if the request object is unable to reach that URL within 5 seconds, just bomb out. Okay. Now we can do some quick and dirty error checking. And I'm going to introduce you to a new wonderful thing in PHP. I'm sorry. Good Lord. I need to be shot for that. Some new things in Python. So one of the things we're going to do is we're going to check for something in a list in a quick and easy way. You don't have to necessarily always loop through a structure in order to access the data in it. So I'll explain as I'm coding, and you'll understand more of what I mean, because I am terrible at explaining this right now. So if r.statuscode. Status codes, you've heard of them, even if you don't think you've heard of them. Everyone's heard of the term, oh, you got a 404 error. That's actually a status code that says the page cannot be found. There's 403s, there's 500s, there's 200 and 201. So the status code in here, we'll go ahead and just print this for now. Let's just do that. Let's just print the status code. And down here, we'll just test our thing real quick, okay? So we'll say get barcode, and the data is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? And we will run our python.main, and we got a status code of 200. Isn't that cool? Let's go ahead and comment that out, because we don't need that. So that is our status code. Okay. So the question is like, what did we get? Well, r.content will tell us what we got. Now, keep in mind, we are downloading a GIF. We are asking for it as a GIF. Somewhere in here. Ah, there it is. Image type of GIF. Okay. So this is going to come back as binary. There you go. That's a lot. It's not even binary. That's bytecode? Yeah. Anyway, so it's probably escaped. Yeah, it'll all escape. Anyway, so as you see, the content's kind of like really difficult to deal with. But here's the cool part. We got content. And we know the status code is 200. That's a lot of data, sir. There we go. So yeah, bytes is a GIF. There's the header, and there's our bytecode. So that's what the B stands for, is bytes. So it's not binary, it's bytes, which is completely different. So now that we have this image, I'm going to pause for a moment. Okay, so my daughter came in to kiss me goodnight, and I just realized that the total time now has reset. So I have no clue how long this is going to be. I think I only have about 10 more minutes, if that. So I'm going to just go ahead and finish up my statement here, kind of like my thought process, and then we'll move on to the next video. Anyway, so here what we've done is we're printing the status code, okay, and we're wanting 200s. 200 means that we got it. 201 also means we got it. It's part of the REST API. It's very complicated, not going to get into it. But 200 and 201 are both acceptable. And then content, of course, has to be something. In this case, it's bytecode, which is a GIF. So what we're going to do now that we have this content is we're going to do a real quick and dirty status code check, okay? And we're going to say if r.statuscode is in this list, okay? And what this will do is it will actually say, basically what it's saying is whatever the status code, in this case is 200, right? If the status code is in, wait a minute, I'm an idiot, look at that. That's a terrible thing there. You know what? They're not strings, they're actually numbers. You know what? But I think it comes back as a string. I'm not sure. So we'll force this to be an int. I think it is an int anyway, but that's probably more correct anyway. So we're forcing the status code here to be an integer, okay? And we're saying if this integer of 200 is in 200 or 201, either of those two, then we're good, right? I don't really want to say if it's good. I mean, you can. You know what? We'll leave it this way because this is how most people think. I would say if it's not good, but in this case, we're going to say if it's good. So we're going to say that, you know, the barcode downloaded. That's great. Now let's simply say, boop, 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 boop. We're going to print all good. Okay. And then else print or dot invalid status. I can't. Wow. Status code, and we'll say the status code itself. And again, we don't have to fill this out, but we're going to. Okay. Dot format code equals r dot status code. Okay. So we're going to get rid of this, and we'll just comment this out for now. So now what we've done is with this get barcode, we're basically saying, hey, reach out to this URL. We're going to interject right here your data, okay? In this case, the data that we sent was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're sending that here, which is then being injected into here. So it's saying data equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we are creating a full URL out of these two added together. There's other ways to do this, but that's the easiest. R equals request.get full URL. Okay, timeout of 5 seconds. After 5 seconds, it's obviously something broke. And then if the status code of the request object comes back with a 200 or 201, then everything's good. If not, then we print we got an invalid status code. So let's try to break this just so you can see the error checking work. And the other thing is it's good in general for people to test their own code. So we'll say instead of .com, it's .us. Hopefully they haven't bought that domain. They may have, I don't know. So down here we're going to clear just to get all that out, and we're going to pi, and look, it broke. Okay. In this case, it broke horribly, and it broke horribly for a few reasons. Mainly the fact that it couldn't find that URL. So this is where try catch will fix instead of just an if statement. Okay. So we're going to try this, all of this. Okay. And then except, right? Exception as E because we don't know what the problem is. In this case, we do. Max tries accepted with the URL. It couldn't find it, right? So we're just going to say unable to get barcode image due to error, and then we'll just say format E, right? And then we will pass the error. Basically, the pass thing is basically saying continue on like nothing happened, because honestly, we don't want to crash the program. We just wanted to report that something broke and then move along. So by doing this in a try except, or a try catch as I call it, now we will catch all of these horrible things that have happened, these tracebacks and stuff, and instead we'll get a more uniformed thing. And in this case, you see, we just simply said unable to get barcode image due to error, blah 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 blah, right? So now we'll change this to .com again, and everything will happily go along. It'll say all good, and so we've got that data. I think we are at the point where we've hit the wall of time. We're going to be coding pretty much 30 minutes at a time. It's good, so it gives you time for you to like process it and think. We've gone over some pretty big things today. We've gone over try and accept, which are huge for error checking. We've also learned how to import the request object. We've also learned what the request object was, and also how to parse inside a list quick and dirty in a fashion without having to actually say for each of these status codes, check to see if it equals, because that's the long way of doing it. This is the more concise, and this is a term you'll hear me say quite often called Pythonic. This is the Pythonic way of doing it. This is the way that Python people normally would do it. Other programmers would have to like explode that out a little bit and loop through each of these two and do a statement saying if the status code equals 200 or 201, 202, and it's complicated. So, anywho, that's the end of that. So we can get student data because we're opening the file, right? We've proven that, and we've gotten our get the barcode. So I'm going to stop rambling now. Do the whole like, subscribe thing, and share with your friends who are interested in programming. This will be something that isn't a whim. I'm going to be doing these pretty often. Here soon, I'll actually be doing these for my main program of Python, or Python, good lord, of Crafty. But this project was thrown on me by my wife, and it's an important thing to keep your wife happy. So if I could save her time, I'll do it. Anyway, so all that said, have a good day, and thanks for watching.